Sometimes the love we've lost finds a way back to us when we need it most. For 8-year-old Keya, that love comes in the form of a beaten, tar-covered dog who won't stop following her through the dusty streets of Willow Creek. It's 1892, and life on the Apache reservation is hard enough without caring for a stray that most folks would drive away with stones. But something in the dog's eyes reminds Keya of the mother she lost 3 years ago. Day after day, the faithful animal trails behind her, never begging, never demanding, just hoping. When Keya finally finds the courage to help him, she discovers something hidden in his matted fur that changes everything. What could a neglected dog possibly know about her family's deepest secrets? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered adobe buildings of Willow Creek, where the Apache reservation met the fading frontier of New Mexico territory. 8-year-old Keya Silverwind pulled her mother's memory shawl tighter around her thin shoulders as she walked the familiar path to the trading post. The worn Apache blanket, woven in deep blues and earth tones, was all she had left of Illa Silverwind, that and the hollow ache that never quite left her chest. Keya's bare feet knew every rock and rut in the dusty road. She had walked this route countless times with her mother, back when the world made sense and laughter came easy. Now, 3 years after that terrible night, she walked alone, carrying the weight of memories too heavy for such small shoulders. Behind her, 20 paces, back and moving like a shadow, came the dog. He was a pitiful sight, ribs showing through patches of matted fur, his coat stained with hardened tar and dried mud. Someone had hurt this animal, and hurt him badly. Yet, every morning for the past week, he had appeared at the edge of their small property, following her with eyes that spoke of ancient sadness and stubborn hope. "Keya, child, walk faster," called her grandfather from the doorway of their modest home. Ahiga Silverwind stood tall despite his 72 years, his weathered face carved by decades of desert sun and hard decisions. His long grey hair was braided with leather strips, and around his waist hung the sacred medicine pouch that had belonged to his father and his father's father. The trading post opens early, and old Patterson gets ornery when folks arrive after the good supplies are picked over. Keya quickened her pace, but not before glancing back at the dog. He had stopped when grandfather appeared, as if he understood the old man's disapproval. The animal's intelligent brown eyes met hers for just a moment, a look that somehow reminded her of standing at her mother's bedside, watching life slip away like water through cupped hands. The reservation sprawled across red earth and scrub brush, home to nearly 300 Apache families who had learned to balance old ways with new necessities. Adobe houses mixed with traditional wickiups. Children played with store-bought toys alongside games passed down through generations. It was a world caught between what was and what had to be. At the trading post, Keya exchanged eggs from there, chickens for flour, salt, and a precious small bag of coffee beans. James Patterson, the Anglo trader who had run the post for 15 years, treated the Apache families with more respect than most outsiders, though his prices reflected the isolation of their location. "Morning, Miss Keya," Patterson said, weighing the eggs on his brass scale. "These look fine. Your hens are laying well this season." "Yes, sir. Grandfather says it's because we sing to them in the old language." Keya counted the coins he placed in her palm, careful to make sure the amount was fair. Illa had taught her that. Always check your change, but do it respectfully. "Your mother was a wise woman," Patterson said quietly, his voice carrying the reverence reserved for the deceased. "She had a way with all living things." Keya nodded, not trusting her voice. People in Willow Creek still spoke of Illa in hushed tones. How she had been killed during a raid by Mexican bandits, how she had died protecting her family. But Keya remembered that night differently. She remembered her mother's fear in the weeks leading up to it, the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room, the way Illa had held her extra tight those final evenings. Outside the trading post, the dog waited. He had positioned himself across the street, partially hidden behind a water trough, but his eyes never left the building's entrance. When Keya emerged with her purchases, he fell into step behind her, maintaining that careful 20-pace distance. "Shoo!" called Mrs. Rodriguez from her porch, waving a broom at the animal. "Get on, you mangy thing. We don't need strays bringing disease to the children." The dog flinched but didn't run. Instead, he simply altered his path, giving the woman's property a wide berth while continuing to follow Keya. There was dignity in his persistence, a nobility that the tar and neglect couldn't quite hide. Back home, Grandfather Ahiga sat in his carved wooden chair, working on a pair of moccasins for one of the younger families. His weathered hands moved with practiced skill, pushing the bone needle through soft deerskin. The sacred medicine pouch rested against his hip, containing the healing herbs and spiritual items that marked him as one of the reservation's traditional healers. "That dog followed you again," he said, without looking up from his work. "Yes, Grandfather, you must not encourage it. We have barely enough food for ourselves." Keya set the supplies on their small wooden table, arranging them carefully. As her mother had taught her, everything in its place, everything treated with respect. "I haven't given him anything?" "Good. Wild things belong in the wild. When we interfere, we often cause more harm than help." But Keya had seen the way her grandfather's eyes lingered on the dog when he thought no one was watching. There was something in his expression, not just disapproval, but recognition tinged with an emotion she couldn't quite identify. The afternoon brought Sister Margaret from the mission school, a kind Irish woman who had been teaching Apache children to read and write. In English for nearly a decade, she was one of the few Anglo adults who made an effort to learn Apache customs and language. "Good afternoon, Ahiga," she said in halting Apache before switching to English. "I wanted to discuss Keya's progress. She's reading at a level far beyond her age." Keya listened from the corner where she sat mending a torn dress, her mother's silver bracelet catching the afternoon light. The delicate jewelry piece contained intricate Apache symbols representing protection and guidance, symbols that seemed to grow more meaningful as she grew older. Her mother started teaching her letters when she was barely 4. Grandfather replied, "Illa believed education would be necessary for survival in the changing world." Illa was right, Sister Margaret agreed. Keya has a gift for languages. She could become a teacher herself one day, helping bridge the gap between our communities. Through the window, Keya could see the dog lying in the shade of a mesquite tree at the edge of their property. Even from this distance, she could tell he was watching the house, waiting, always waiting. That evening, as the sun painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Keya helped her grandfather prepare their simple supper of beans, corn cakes, and precious strips of dried venison. The routine was comforting, a connection to countless generations who had performed these same tasks in this same land. "Tell me about my mother when she was my age," Keya said as they ate. A request she made often but never tired of hearing answered. Ahiga's stern expression softened slightly. Illa was curious about everything. She would disappear for hours, exploring every canyon and creek within walking distance. "Your grandmother used to worry herself sick. Did she have any pets?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He paused, a piece of corn cake halfway to his mouth, and his eyes drifted toward the window, where the dog's silhouette was barely visible in the growing darkness. "She loved all animals," he said carefully, "but we never kept pets. It wasn't our way." Something in his tone suggested there was more to the story, but Keya had learned not to push when her grandfather's voice took on that particular quality, distant and guarded, like a door closing on rooms she wasn't ready to enter. Later, as the night settled around their home, and the desert came alive with the sounds of coyotes and night birds, Keya lay on her sleeping mat and thought about the dog. She had heard the other children at school talking about him. Some claimed he was a ghost dog, returned from the spirit world to deliver messages from the dead. Others insisted he was simply a stray, driven mad by mistreatment and starvation. But Keya sensed something different, something that reminded her of the way her mother used to hum while she worked, a melody that seemed to carry all the love and sadness in the world. The dog's presence felt like that melody, like a song trying to remember its words. Through her small window, she could see a pair of eyes reflecting the starlight from beneath the mesquite tree. The dog hadn't left. Through storm and heat, day and night, he maintained his vigil, waiting for something only he understood. As sleep finally took her, Keya whispered a prayer in Apache, not for herself, but for the lost soul keeping watch. In their yard, tomorrow she decided she would find the courage to discover what he needed. Tomorrow she would listen to what his patient eyes were trying to tell her. Dawn came earlier than Keya expected, pulled from sleep by a sound that shouldn't exist, the gentle whisper of rain on their tin roof. Rain in October was unusual this far south, but the desert sometimes offered unexpected gifts to those patient, enough to receive them. She dressed quietly and stepped outside to find the dog lying motionless in the lean-to. Panic seized her heart until she saw the slight rise and fall of his ribcage. He was alive, but barely. The rain had washed away some of the surface grime, revealing patches of golden-brown fur beneath the hardened tar. Without conscious thought, Keya found herself kneeling beside him with a bowl of warm water and the softest rag she could find. The dog's eyes opened as she approached, weak but alert, tracking her movements with an intensity that seemed to pierce straight through to her soul. "I'm going to help you," she whispered in Apache, then repeated it in the broken Spanish her mother had taught her. "Voy a ayudarte." At the Spanish words, the dog's ears perked slightly, and he made a soft sound that might have been recognition. Keya began the delicate work of softening the tar with warm water. The process was slow and painful for both of them. The dog whimpered as the hardened substance began to loosen, pulling at his skin, but he never tried to bite or pull away. Instead, he seemed to understand that this temporary pain would lead to relief. As she worked, Keya found herself humming, the same melody her mother used to sing while tending to sick children on the reservation. It was an old Apache healing song, passed down through generations of women who understood that music could soothe pain in ways that medicine alone could not. The dog's breathing gradually became easier, and his eyes never left her face. Keya. Her grandfather's voice cut through the morning quiet like an axe through timber. She turned to find him standing in the doorway, fully dressed despite the early hour, his medicine pouch secured at his waist, and his face set in lines of grim determination. "Step away from the animal. Grandfather, he's—" "Now!" The authority in his voice brooked no argument, but as Keya reluctantly moved back, she saw something that made her breath catch. There, partially revealed by her gentle cleaning, was the edge of something metallic embedded in the fur around the dog's neck. Not just matted hair and tar, but something deliberately hidden. Ahiga knelt beside the dog, his weathered hands surprisingly gentle as he continued the work Keya had started. His movements were practiced, confident, the actions of someone who had done this before. As more tar loosened and fell away, the metallic object became clearer. It was a small leather tag, darkened with age and abuse, but still intact. Carved into its surface were symbols that made Ahiga's hands begin to shake. "What does it say?" Keya whispered. Her grandfather's face had gone pale beneath his weathered tan. He lifted the tag with trembling fingers, angling it toward the morning light. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Espiritu, beloved of Ilah." The words hit Keya like a physical blow. She sank back onto her heels, staring at the dog with new understanding flooding through her like cold water. This wasn't just any stray animal. This was her mother's dog, the one she had whispered about in those final frightened days. "But how?" Keya began. "The raid," Ahiga said, his voice heavy with a weight he had carried for 3 years. "He was with her that night. I thought he died with the others." The dog, Espiritu, lifted his head at the sound of his name. His tail moved in the weakest possible wag, and his eyes filled with what could only be described as relief. Finally, someone remembered. Finally, someone understood. Keya reached out with trembling fingers to touch the leather tag. The surface was scarred and worn, but the carved letters were still clear. Her mother's name seemed to glow in the morning light. A message from beyond death itself. "Tell me what really happened that night," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Grandfather was quiet for so long that Keya thought he might refuse to answer. But when he finally spoke, the words came slowly, like water from a reluctant well. "Your mother was helping people cross the border. Escaped slaves mostly, but also Mexicans fleeing violence, anyone who needed safe passage to sanctuary. She and Espiritu would guide them through the desert at night, using paths known only to our people. Why didn't you tell me? Because the men who killed her were not bandits looking for horses. They were slave hunters, tracking the people she had helped to freedom. They came for her specifically because she had cost them money. Too many lost bounties, too many escaped prizes." The revelation hit Keya like a landslide. Everything she thought she knew about her mother's death had been a protective lie. Illa hadn't died in a random raid. She had been murdered for helping others find freedom. Espiritu was with her that night, Ahiga continued, his hands still working to free the dog from his tar prison. "When the shooting started, she told him to run. I found his tracks leading into the desert, but we thought he was dead. The desert doesn't forgive, especially not animals carrying the scent of violence." Keya looked at the dog with wonder and heartbreak. "He's been searching for us all this time." 3 years, Grandfather confirmed. 3 years wandering, trying to come home. As if responding to their conversation, Espiritu struggled to lift his head higher. His nose twitched as he caught Keya's scent, and despite his weakness, he managed to press his muzzle against her palm. The gesture was gentle, familiar. Exactly the way her mother used to guide Keya's hand when teaching her to touch wounded. "Animals. He remembers me," Keya whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He remembers her and you," Ahiga said quietly. "Dogs see bloodlines the way we see faces." The morning sun climbed higher, revealing more details as they continued their careful work. Beneath the layers of tar and neglect, Espiritu's true nature emerged. He was a medium-sized dog with the lean build of a runner, his coat a mixture of golden brown and black that would have been beautiful when properly cared for. His legs were long and strong, built for covering distance across difficult terrain. This was an animal bred and trained for purpose, not merely kept as a pet. "What kind of work did he do with Mama?" Keya asked. "Border dogs are trained to guide people silently through dangerous territory. They know the safe paths, the water sources, the places to hide. Espiritu was one of the best. He could lead a family through 40 miles of desert without losing a single person." As they spoke, the sound of approaching horses carried across the morning air. Ahiga's entire body went tense, and Espiritu, despite his weakness, raised his head with unmistakable alarm. "Take him inside," Grandfather commanded. "Quickly!" "But why?" "Do as I say. Now." Keya helped support Espiritu as he struggled to stand, his legs shaking from exhaustion and pain. They made it through the back door, just as 3 riders appeared on the main road leading to their house. Through the small window, Keya watched her grandfather straighten his shoulders and walk out to meet the visitors. They were Anglo men, well-armed and dusty from travel, with the hard faces of people who made their living through violence. The lead rider was a thin man with pale eyes and a mustache that couldn't hide the cruel set of his mouth. When he spoke, his voice carried across the yard with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Morning, old man. We're looking for stolen property that might have wandered this way. A dog, valuable animal, belongs to a ranch owner, down in Chihuahua." "I've seen no stolen dogs," Ahiga replied calmly. "Heard tell there's been a stray hanging around your place." Mangy thing, covered in tar. That'd be the one we're after. Keya felt Espiritu tense beside her. The dog's lips pulled back in a silent snarl, and she realized with shock that he recognized these men. Not their faces, perhaps, but their voices, the way they spoke, the threat they represented. Many strays pass through, Grandfather said. The desert is hard on animals without homes. The lead rider dismounted and walked closer to Ahiga, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. See, that's interesting because this particular dog has a talent for leading folks across borders. Folks who maybe shouldn't be crossing borders, if you catch my meaning. I catch nothing but wind and morning air. Don't play games with me. Apache, we know your kind helped slaves escape south during the war. Some habits die hard, I'm thinking. Keya pressed her face closer to the window, her heart pounding so hard she was certain the men would hear it. These weren't simple bounty hunters looking for a lost pet. These were the same kind of men who had killed her mother. If you find this dog, the rider continued, you bring him to us. There's a $50 reward for his return and $50 in consequences for anyone who tries to keep him. $50 was more money than most reservation families saw in half a year. It was also enough to ensure that neighbors might be tempted to betray each other. After the men rode away, Grandfather came inside with his face set like granite. He found Keya still crouched by the window with Espiritu pressed against her side. They'll be back, he said simply. Will you give him to them? Ahiga looked at his granddaughter and the dog, who had somehow found his way home after 3 years of wandering. In that moment, Keya saw her grandfather make a decision that would change everything. No, he said. Some things are worth more than safety. The silver bracelet caught the first light of dawn as Keya slipped silently from the house, carrying a bowl of cornmeal mush and strips of dried meat she had saved from her own portion the night before. Her mother's delicate jewelry piece, with its intricate Apache symbols of protection and guidance, seemed to pulse with warmth against her wrist, as if Illa herself were guiding her daughter's steps toward an act of defiance that could cost them everything. 3 days had passed since the bounty hunter's visit, and Keya had made a decision that would have terrified her just a week ago. Every morning and evening, while Grandfather attended to his duties around the reservation, she would steal away to the lean-to where Espiritu waited with the patience of someone who had learned that good things came to those who endured. The dog's transformation had been remarkable. With regular food and water, his strength was slowly returning. More importantly, as Keya continued the delicate work of removing the hardened tar from his coat, his true nature was emerging. Beneath the abuse and neglect lay an animal of extraordinary intelligence and gentle temperament. "Easy, boy," she whispered as she worked a particularly stubborn patch of tar from his shoulder. "I know it hurts, but we have to get this off you." Espiritu remained perfectly still during these sessions, as if he understood that temporary discomfort would lead to healing. Sometimes, when the pain became too intense, he would press his muzzle against Keya's hand, not to stop her work, but to draw comfort from her presence. It was during one of these cleaning sessions that Keya made a discovery that sent shivers down her spine. As she peeled away a large chunk of tar from Espiritu's left flank, she revealed a pattern of scars that hadn't been made by accident or neglect. Someone had deliberately carved symbols into the dog's skin, Apache symbols that she recognized from her grandfather's medicine ceremonies. "Grandfather," she called, her voice tight with excitement and fear. Ahiga appeared in the doorway of the lean-to, took one look at what she had uncovered, and dropped to his knees beside them. His weathered fingers traced the scarred symbols with the reverence usually reserved for sacred objects. "These are protection marks," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "Your mother marked him as a spiritual guardian." "What does that mean?" "It means she expected him to outlive her. It means she knew danger was coming and wanted to ensure he would be able to find his way back to family when the time came." The implications of this revelation settled over them like dust after a windstorm. Illa had not simply owned a working dog. She had prepared him for a specific mission that would only become necessary after her death. She knew she was going to die, Keya whispered. She knew she was taking risks that might lead to death. Grandfather corrected gently. There is a difference between knowledge and resignation. Over the following days, as Espiritu's strength continued to improve, Keya began to notice other remarkable aspects of his training. He could move through the desert with absolute silence, his paws finding purchase on loose stone without dislodging so much as a pebble. He seemed to know instinctively which plants contained water and which paths would be least visible to watchers on horseback. Most remarkably, he responded to hand signals that Keya had never seen before, but somehow understood how to give. When tight, she gestured toward the main road. He would flatten himself against the ground and become nearly invisible. When she pointed toward the house, he would circle around to approach from the blind side, avoiding open ground where he might be spotted. "He's teaching me," she told Grandfather one evening as they prepared their supper. "Things Mama must have known, but never had time to show me." Ahiga nodded slowly. "Your mother always said that knowledge finds a way to survive, even when the teacher is gone." It was then that the second wave of complications began. Sister Margaret arrived at their home just after sunset, her usually calm demeanor replaced by obvious agitation. She had ridden hard from the mission school, her horse lathered with sweat and her traveling dress dusty from the trail. "Ahiga, we need to talk," she said without preamble. "There are men in town asking questions about Keya's family." "What kind of questions?" "The dangerous kind. They're claiming that Illa was involved in criminal activities before her death. They're offering money for information about her associates and any property she might have left behind." Keya felt the blood drain from her face. Through the window, she could see Espiritu's silhouette in the lean-to, and she realized with growing horror that these men weren't just looking for a dog, they were systematically hunting down everyone connected to her mother's underground work. "How much money?" Grandfather asked quietly. "Enough to tempt desperate people. Times are hard, Ahiga. Families are struggling to feed their children." The weight of Sister Margaret's words settled over them like a funeral shroud. $50 for the dog, and now additional money for information about Illa's activities. In a community where cash was scarce and survival often meant making impossible choices, the temptation would be overwhelming for some. "There's more," Sister Margaret continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "They have names, a list of people they believe worked with Illa. Your name is on it." Ahiga's hand moved instinctively to his medicine pouch, seeking strength from the spiritual power contained within. "They have no proof of anything. They don't need proof. They need someone to blame, and an old Apache medicine man makes a convenient and target." Keya looked back and forth between the adults, understanding dawning like a cold sunrise. Her family wasn't just hiding a dog, they were protecting evidence of a network that had helped dozens of people escape slavery and persecution. And now, 3 years later, someone was determined to destroy anyone connected to that work. "We could send him away," Keya said suddenly. "Tell Espiritu to go deep into the desert where no one could find him." Both adults turned to look at her, and she saw in their faces the same expression her mother used to wear when confronted with impossible choices, the look of someone weighing mercy against survival. "That dog has been searching for home for 3 years, Sister Margaret said gently. "Sending him away now would be a cruelty worse than death. And he carries knowledge that died with your mother," Grandfather added. "Knowledge that could help us understand who really killed her and why." As if sensing he was the subject of their discussion, Espiritu appeared in the doorway of the lean-to. His movements were still careful, painful, but he managed to walk to where they stood. Without hesitation, he sat beside Keya and leaned his weight against her leg, a gesture of trust and protection that spoke louder than words. "He's chosen." "His side," Sister Margaret observed with a sad smile. "The question is whether we're brave enough to choose ours." That night, as the desert settled into its familiar rhythm of cooling wind and distant coyote songs, Keya lay awake, listening to the sounds of her grandfather moving restlessly around their small home. Through the thin walls, she could hear him whispering prayers in the old language, asking their ancestors for guidance in decisions that would affect not just their family, but everyone who had trusted Ila with their lives and secrets. Outside, Espiritu kept his vigil beneath the mesquite tree, his ears constantly moving as he monitored the night sounds for anything that didn't belong. Even in his weakened state, he was standing guard, protecting the family that his beloved Ila had died trying to save. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions that would test the courage her mother had tried to instill in her. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Keya felt she wasn't facing those challenges alone. Her mother's spirit lived on in the loyal heart of a dog who had crossed impossible distances to keep a promise made in blood and love. The silver bracelet grew warm against her skin as sleep finally claimed her, and in her dreams she saw her mother walking through moonlit desert with Espiritu at her side, both of them moving toward a light that never seemed to grow closer, but never faded. Away, hidden beneath the loose floorboard where her grandfather kept important papers, Keya had discovered fragments of her mother's diary, pages torn and scattered, written in both Apache syllabary and careful English script. The journal pages had been hastily concealed, some still bearing water stains and what looked like tear marks. Now, by lamplight, she read her mother's words with growing understanding of the dangerous world Ila had navigated. "The families keep coming," one entry read. "Father Miguel says there are 12 people waiting in the safe house across the border. Espiritu knows the route better than I do now. Sometimes I think he can sense danger before it appears. Yesterday, he stopped our group 3 times, each time just before we would have walked into trouble. God has given me a 4-legged angel." Keya traced her finger along her mother's handwriting, imagining Ila bent over these same pages by flickering candlelight, recording the details of a secret life that had cost her everything. Another entry, dated just 2 weeks before the raid. "The hunters are getting closer. Someone has been talking, giving information about our routes. Espiritu senses my fear. He hasn't left my side in days. If something happens to me, I pray he will find his. Way back to Papa and Keya. He carries more than loyalty in his heart. He carries proof." Proof. The word echoed in Keya's mind as she carefully returned the journal pages to their hiding place. What kind of proof could a dog carry? The next morning brought answers in the form of Father Miguel's return visit, this time accompanied by a woman Keya had never seen before, a Mexican senora with prematurely gray hair and hands that spoke of hard work and harder choices. "This is Rosa Morales," Father Miguel said as he introduced the woman to grandfather. "She worked with your daughter in the crossing network." Rosa's eyes immediately found Espiritu, who had been resting in the shade beside their front door. The moment she saw him, she crossed herself and whispered something in rapid Spanish. "Dios santo, it is really him, Espiritu, mi valiente." She approached the dog slowly, her voice thick with emotion. "I thought you were dead, brave one." Espiritu's response was immediate and profound. Despite his lingering weakness, he struggled to his feet and walked to Rosa, pressing his head against her weathered hands. His tail wagged for the first time since arriving at their home, a sight that brought tears to Keya's eyes. "He remembers." "You," Keya said. "We saved 43 people together," Rosa replied, kneeling to embrace the dog. "Families, mostly. Children like you, running from men who would treat them like property instead of human beings." As Rosa spoke, her hands automatically began checking Espiritu's condition, feeling for injuries, examining his coat, running her fingers along his neck and shoulders with the practiced efficiency of someone who had tended many wounded animals. "Datai, and collar," she said suddenly, her fingers finding the area where Keya had discovered the leather tag. "Did you find what she hid?" "Just the name tag," Keya said. Rosa shook her head, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Your mother was cleverer than that. Espiritu. Show them. The dog looked up at Rosa's face, reading some signal that the humans had missed. Then, to everyone's amazement, he walked to the nearest wall and began scratching at the adobe with his front paws, not random digging but deliberate marks that formed a pattern. He's trained to reveal hiding places, Rosa explained. When given the right command, he can find anything illa concealed along their routes. Grandfather knelt beside the dog, studying the scratches. What is he trying to show us? Not here, Father Miguel said, glancing nervously toward the windows. If there are watchers, we cannot risk revealing everything in the open. They moved. Inside, where Rosa gave Espiritu a series of hand signals that Keya had never seen before, the dog responded immediately, moving to a specific corner of the room and sitting with his nose pointing toward a section of wall that looked identical to every other section. Your mother hid things throughout the territory, Rosa explained. Emergency supplies, evidence, documents that could protect the people she helped. Espiritu knows where everything is hidden. The implications were staggering. Illa had created an entire network of concealed resources, and only her dog knew their locations. No wonder the bounty hunters were so determined to find him. What kind of evidence? Keya asked. Father Miguel and Rosa exchanged a look that spoke of shared secrets and mutual trust built through years of dangerous work. Names, Father Miguel said finally. Records of who was helping and who was hunting. Your mother kept detailed accounts of every crossing, every family saved, every narrow escape. She also documented the men who were tracking them, their methods, their contacts, their crimes, including the men who killed her. Rosa added quietly. Keya felt the world shift beneath her feet. Her mother hadn't just been a victim of random violence. She had been a meticulous record keeper who had documented evidence against the very men who eventually murdered her. Where are these records? Grandfather asked. Rosa gestured toward Espiritu, who was still sitting in perfect position beside the wall. Scattered in hiding places along the crossing routes. Your daughter was too smart to keep everything in one location, and he remembers where each cache is hidden better than any map. That dog has a memory that would shame a scholar. Over the next several hours, Rosa shared stories that painted a picture of Illa's secret life that none of them had fully understood. The network had been larger and more sophisticated than Keya had imagined. Dozens of people working together, across hundreds of miles, all coordinated through a system of signals, safe houses, and hidden supply routes. Your mother was the best guide we ever had, Rosa said, scratching behind Espiritu's ears as he dozed in the afternoon warmth. She could read the desert like a priest reads scripture. And this dog, he was her perfect partner. Together, they never lost a single person. Until that last night, Grandfather said heavily. That last night was different. Someone had betrayed the route, given detailed information to the hunters. Illa knew it was a trap, but there were children in the group. 2 little girls, younger than Keya. She couldn't abandon them. Rosa's voice broke slightly as she continued. Espiritu tried to warn her. He kept circling back, showing signs of distress. But Illa was determined to get those children to safety, no matter the cost. What happened to the families she was guiding? That night, Keya asked, they made it across, all of them. Your mother died, but her mission succeeded. The knowledge that her mother's sacrifice had not been in vain brought Keya a complex mixture of pride and grief. Illa had chosen to save strangers' children at the cost of leaving her own daughter orphaned. A decision that spoke to a kind of courage Keya was only beginning to comprehend. As evening approached, Rosa prepared to leave, but not before giving Keya and her grandfather a warning that chilled them to the bone. The men who came asking about Espiritu, they are not just bounty hunters. Their leader is a man named Joaquin Varga, and he has been hunting the remains of our network for 3 years. He believes that if he can eliminate everyone who helped people escape, he can resume his human trafficking operation without interference. How many others are still alive? Grandfather asked. Besides you? maybe 6 or 7, scattered across 200 miles of border territory. We've all been living under assumed names, staying hidden, hoping he would eventually give up the hunt. But he hasn't. Men like Varga never give up when there's money involved. Every escaped slave represented hundreds of dollars in lost profit. Every successful crossing was money out of his pocket. As Rosa mounted her horse to leave, she turned back to them with one final piece of advice that would haunt Keya's dreams. Trust no one except each other and Father Miguel. Varga has informants everywhere, and $50 is enough to turn even decent people into betrayers. Watch for signs that you're being watched, and if the time comes to run, don't hesitate. That dog knows routes that could keep you alive until help arrives. After Rosa disappeared into the gathering darkness, Keya sat beside Espiritu in the lean-to, her mind racing with the weight of everything she had learned. Her mother had been a hero in a war that most people didn't even know was being fought. She had saved dozens of lives and documented evidence that could bring killers to justice. And now that same burden of choice was falling to an 8-year-old girl who had never imagined she might need her mother's courage so soon. "What do you don't think, boy?" she asked, stroking Espiritu's newly clean coat. "Are we brave enough to finish what Mama started?" The dog lifted his head and looked at her with eyes that held depths of experience no animal should possess. In that gaze, Keya saw the answer she needed. Not just courage, but the understanding that some things were worth any risk. Her mother's silver bracelet seemed to grow warm against her wrist, as if Illa herself were reaching across the divide, between life and death, to touch her daughter's hand in blessing and encouragement. The weathered map appeared as if conjured from the earth itself. Espiritu had led Keya to a cluster of boulders, half a mile from their home, his nose working the ground with the intensity of a creature following invisible trails known only to him. When he stopped at what appeared to be solid rock, Keya almost turned back until she noticed the way morning shadows fell across the stone, revealing a crack barely wide enough for a child's hand. Inside the crevice, wrapped in oiled leather and protected from the desert's harsh elements, was a hand-drawn map unlike anything Keya had ever seen. The parchment showed trails that weren't on any official survey, secret paths winding between Apache territory and Mexican safe houses, marked with symbols that indicated water sources, hiding places, and danger points along the way. Mama drew. "This," Keya breathed, recognizing her mother's careful script in the margin notes written in 3 languages, Apache, Spanish, and English. Beside her, Espiritu sat with perfect stillness, his intelligent eyes watching her face as she absorbed the magnitude of what they had discovered. This wasn't just a map. It was a master plan of an entire underground railroad system that had operated under the nose of territorial authorities for years. The trail markers made sense now. The seemingly random arrangements of stones near water sources, the peculiar scratches on certain trees, the way some paths seemed to wind unnecessarily through difficult terrain, all of it had been deliberate, part of a navigation system that only trained guides like her mother could read. "You helped make this, didn't you?" she asked Espiritu, who responded with a soft whine that sounded almost like agreement. When they returned home, Grandfather took one look at the map and immediately began securing their doors and windows with unusual urgency. "This cannot remain here," he said, studying the detailed routes and safe houses marked across hundreds of square miles. "If Varga's men find this, they will know exactly where to look for the remaining network members. Where can we hide it? We cannot. We must return it to the people who need it most." Before Keya could ask what he meant, the sound of approaching horses echoed across the morning air, not the casual pace of neighbors or traders, but the purposeful rhythm of men with urgent business. "Hide!" Grandfather commanded, and Keya quickly retreated to the back room, with Espiritu pressed close beside her. Through a crack in the door, she watched 3 men dismount in their yard. These weren't the same bounty hunters from before. These were Mexican vaqueros with the bearing of professional soldiers. their weapons worn but well-maintained, their horses bearing the brands of wealthy ranchers. The leader was a man of perhaps 40 years, with graying temples and scars that marked him as someone who had survived more than his share of violence. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to command. "Buenos dias, abuelo. We are looking for information about a woman named Illa Silverwind." "I know nothing of importance," grandfather replied in Spanish, far more fluent than he usually revealed to strangers. "Perhaps. But we believe she helped certain people cross into our territory, people who were fleeing justice in your country. Many people cross borders. The desert does not recognize the lines drawn on maps." The leader stepped closer, his hand resting on his gun belt, in a gesture that managed to be both casual and threatening. These were not ordinary travelers. They were escaped slaves, worth considerable money to their rightful owners. "Slavery is illegal in Mexico," grandfather said calmly. "Laws change depending on who enforces them." The conversation continued for several tense minutes, with the Mexican leader pressing for information and grandfather deflecting with the skill of someone who had spent decades navigating dangerous political waters. But Keya could see the strain in her grandfather's posture, the way his hand kept moving toward his medicine pouch for spiritual strength. Finally, the leader gave up his diplomatic approach. "We know she had a dog, a guide dog trained for border crossings. If that animal is still alive, it represents a considerable threat to legitimate business interests on both sides of the border. I have seen no such animal." "Then you will not mind if we search your property?" "I mind very much. This is sovereign Apache land, and you have no authority here." The tension in the yard stretched taut as a bowstring. Through the crack in the door, Keya could see all three men had shifted their stance, hands moving closer to their weapons. Beside her, Espiritu had gone absolutely rigid. His lips pulled, back in a silent snarl that revealed teeth still capable of delivering serious damage. "Search if you must," grandfather said finally, "but do so quickly and leave in peace." The men spread out across their small property, checking the lean-to, the chicken coop, the small garden plot where they grew corn and beans. One of them lingered, near the mesquite tree where Espiritu usually rested, studying the ground with the attention of someone who knew how to read tracks. "Something has been sleeping here," he called to his leader. "Recently, animal tracks. Could be dog. Hard to tell, with all the scratching and digging." Keya held her breath as the men continued their search. Espiritu pressed against her side, with every muscle coiled for action. She could feel the tension radiating from his body. Not fear, but the controlled readiness of a warrior waiting for the signal to fight. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, the men concluded their search and remounted their horses. But before leaving, the leader had one final exchange with grandfather that made Keya's blood run cold. "You should know, viejo, that we are not the only ones looking for this dog. There are others, men with less patience and fewer scruples than ourselves. When they come, they will not ask politely. Is that a threat? It is a warning, from one grandfather to another." After the riders disappeared toward town, grandfather came inside to find Keya still crouched in the back room with Espiritu. The dog had finally relaxed, but his ears remained alert, constantly monitoring for sounds that didn't belong. "They know he's here," Keya said. "They suspect. There is a difference." "How long before they come back with more men?" Grandfather sat, heavily in his wooden chair, suddenly looking every one of his 72 years. "Not long. Word is spreading that the dog has been found. Soon, every bounty hunter and slave trader in the territory will be converging on Willow Creek. Then we have to leave. Running would confirm their suspicions, and where would we go? An old man and a young girl traveling with a guide dog would be noticed everywhere we stopped." Keya looked at the map spread across their table, its network of secret routes offering both hope and impossible choices. Her mother had died protecting this knowledge, and now the responsibility was falling to them. Rosa said, "Espiritu knows." Where Mama hid evidence against these men, she said slowly. Evidence that could stop them permanently. Evidence that could also get us killed if we try to retrieve it, or evidence that could get us killed if we don't. Grandfather studied his granddaughter's face, seeing in her expression the same determined intelligence that had driven Illa to take impossible risks for the sake of others. The silver bracelet on Keya's wrist caught the afternoon light, its protective symbols seeming to pulse with encouragement from beyond the grave. Your mother always said that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite fear, he said finally. What are you saying? I'm saying that tomorrow, when the moon is dark, we will ask Espiritu to show us what your mother wanted us to find. Outside, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, unusual for October, but perhaps fitting for the tempest that was about to engulf their lives. As evening approached, Keya sat with Espiritu on their small porch, watching the desert transform under the approaching weather. Tomorrow, we find out what secrets you've been carrying, she told the dog, who responded by resting his head on her lap with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of 3 years' worth of faithful waiting. In the distance, thunder rumbled across the darkening sky, and Keya couldn't shake the feeling that the storm approaching was about much more than rain. The carved wooden cross felt warm in Keya's palm as she held it up to catch the moonlight, no bigger than her thumb. The simple religious symbol bore the smooth wear of countless hands that had clutched it in prayer and desperation. Along its base, barely visible scratches spelled out words in Spanish, "Para los niños," for the children. Espiritu had led them to this second cache just before midnight, guiding them through desert terrain so treacherous that Keya marveled anyone could navigate it in darkness. Yet the dog moved with absolute confidence, his paws finding secure footing on loose scree and narrow ledges that would have challenged an experienced tracker in full daylight. The hiding place was a natural cave, concealed behind a curtain of desert willow that looked impenetrable until Espiritu nosed aside the branches to reveal the opening. Inside, protected by layers of oiled canvas, were treasures that spoke to her mother's careful planning and enormous heart. Letters, dozens of them, written in multiple languages and hands, all addressed to La Ángel del Desierto, the desert angel. Keya's hands trembled as she read testimonials from families her mother had guided to safety. Señora Illa, because of you, my children sleep in beds instead of slave quarters. We pray for your soul every night. Dear lady, the baby you helped me carry across the desert is now walking and speaking his first words. He will know your name before he knows his own. To the Apache woman who risked everything for strangers, there are no words in any language to express our gratitude. Page after page of gratitude, hope and love, evidence of a legacy that stretched far beyond the borders of their small reservation. Her mother had touched dozens of lives, changed the course of entire family trees, created ripples of freedom that would echo through generations. She saved all of these people? Keya whispered. Grandfather nodded, his weathered face soft with pride and grief. 43 successful crossings in 2 years. No one else in the network came close to that record. But it was the second bundle of documents that made their blood run cold. These were written in Illa's careful script, documenting not the successes, but the dangers. Detailed descriptions of the men who hunted escaped slaves, their methods, their contacts, their crimes against both runaways and the people who helped them. Joaquin Varga, Keya read aloud from one report, age approximately 35, scar along left jawline from knife fight, operates from Hacienda 20 miles south of Palomas, has killed at least 7 network guides over past 5 years. Known associates include territorial officials who provide information about planned escapes. The reports went on for pages, documenting a web of corruption that reached from Mexican ranches to American territorial offices. Her mother had been building a case that could have brought down an entire criminal organization if she had lived long enough to present it to honest authorities. This is why they killed her, Keya said. the pieces finally falling into place, not just to stop her from helping people escape, but to prevent this evidence from reaching the wrong people. The right people, Grandfather corrected. Your mother was going to present this to federal marshals who were investigating territorial corruption. But she never got the chance. No, Varga found out about her plans and moved first. As they carefully repacked the documents, Father Miguel emerged from the shadows at the cave entrance. His sudden appearance should have been startling, but somehow Keya had been expecting him. The priest had a gift for appearing when he was most needed. Rosa sent word that you would be here tonight, he said, settling beside them in the cave's protective darkness. She thought you should know. Varga has recruited additional men. At least a dozen gunfighters arrived in Palomas yesterday. Coming here, Grandfather asked. Coming everywhere. He's planning to sweep the entire territory, eliminating everyone connected to the network in a single coordinated strike. The magnitude of the threat was overwhelming. It wasn't just their family in danger. It was every person who had ever helped Ila save a life. How long do we have? Keya asked. Days, perhaps less. But there is hope. Father Miguel reached into his traveling pack and withdrew another bundle of letters. I've been in contact with federal marshals in Santa Fe. They're finally ready to act on your mother's evidence, if we can get it to them safely. Santa Fe is 200 miles away, Grandfather pointed out. Yes, a journey that would require crossing Varga's territory and avoiding patrols that know exactly what to look for. An impossible journey, Grandfather concluded. For most people, yes. Father Miguel looked meaningfully at Espiritu, who had been listening to their conversation with the focused attention of someone understanding every word. But your daughter trained the perfect guide for exactly this kind of mission. The implications struck Keya like lightning. They weren't just talking about hiding evidence. They were planning to use her mother's roots and her mother's dog to complete the mission that had cost Ila her life. It's too dangerous, Grandfather said firmly. I will not risk Keya's life. For papers and testimony. With respect, my friend, Keya's life is already at risk. Varga will never stop hunting as long as witnesses remain alive. But if we can get this evidence to federal authorities, we can end his operation permanently. As if to emphasize Father Miguel's point, the distant sound of gunfire echoed across the desert, too far away to be an immediate threat, but close enough to remind them that violence was a constant presence in their world. Someone else is under attack tonight, Father Miguel said grimly. Varga is making his move. Keya looked at the carved wooden cross in her palm, thinking about the children whose freedom her mother had died to secure. Then she looked at Espiritu, whose scarred but noble face reflected moonlight like a beacon of hope in the darkness. Mama would want us to try, she said quietly. Your mother would want you to live, Grandfather replied. Living isn't enough. Not when people are dying because we're too afraid to act. The words came from somewhere deeper than her 8 years of experience should have allowed, as if her mother's spirit were speaking through her, lending adult wisdom to a child's voice. Father Miguel studied Keya's face with the careful attention of someone who had learned to recognize true calling when he saw it. The journey would take at least a week, traveling only at night, avoiding all main roads and settlements. You would be completely dependent on Espiritu's knowledge of the routes, and if we're caught, then we share your mother's fate. The brutal honesty of his answer should have terrified Keya, but instead it brought a strange sense of peace. Some choices were so clear that fear became irrelevant. This was about more than their personal safety. It was about honoring the sacrifice of a woman who had given her life so that others might be free. When do we leave? She asked. Grandfather's. Resistance crumbled as he saw the steel determination in his granddaughter's eyes, the same unshakable resolve that had driven Ila to walk into danger for the sake of strangers' children. 3 days, he said heavily. We need time to prepare supplies and study the routes, and we need to pray that our ancestors will guide us through what comes next. As they made their way back home through the starlit desert, Espiritu ranging, Ahead to scout for dangers, Keya felt the weight of destiny settling around her shoulders like her mother's memory shawl. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of courage she wasn't sure she possessed. But tonight, walking in the footsteps of a hero she was only beginning to understand, she felt ready to discover what kind of person she was truly meant to become. The leather dog tag emerged from beneath the final layer of hardened tar like a message from the grave itself. Keya had been working for nearly an hour, using warm water and infinite patience to free the last stubborn patches from around Espiritu's neck when her fingers found the small, flat object pressed against his skin. "Grandfather, come quickly!" she called, her voice tight with excitement. The tag was darker than the one they had found before, made from leather that had been deliberately treated to resist weather and wear, but it was what was carved into its surface that made both Keya and Ahiga gasp in recognition. "Espiritu, beloved of Ilah," Keya read aloud, tracing the carefully etched letters with her fingertip. But beneath those familiar words was something new, a second line of text that hadn't been on the first tag. "Guardian of Truth." "Two tags," Grandfather murmured, his weathered hands shaking as he examined the hidden collar piece. She made him wear two tags. Why would she do that? Because one was meant to be found, and one was meant to be hidden until the right moment. As Keya continued examining the tag, she noticed something that made her heart race. The leather wasn't just carved, it was hollowed out, creating a tiny compartment no bigger than a coin. And something was inside that compartment, something that crinkled like paper when she pressed the edges. "There's something hidden in here," she whispered. With trembling fingers, she worked the tiny piece of folded paper from its leather hiding place. The document was no bigger than her palm, but when she unfolded it, she found herself looking at her mother's handwriting, not the careful script from the journal pages, but urgent, hasty letters written under obvious stress. "If you are reading this," the note began, "then Espiritu has succeeded in finding family, and I am most likely dead. What I am about to tell you will put you in terrible danger, but justice demands that the truth be known." Keya's hands shook as she continued reading. The note went on to reveal information that changed everything they thought they knew about Ila's death. "The raid that killed me was not random. Joaquin Varga discovered our plans to present evidence to federal marshals, and he arranged my murder to prevent that testimony. But I was prepared for this possibility. Hidden in Espiritu's collar is a key, literally, to a safety deposit box in the Territorial Bank of Santa Fe. Inside that box is everything needed to prove Varga's crimes: photographs, signed confessions from escaped slaves, financial records showing payments to corrupt officials, and most importantly, a detailed map of his entire trafficking operation. Grandfather took the note with hands that had begun to shake. A bank box. She was always thinking 3 steps ahead. But how do we get to Santa Fe? And how do we access a box that belongs to a dead woman? The answer came from Espiritu himself. As if responding to their discussion, the dog moved to where Keya was sitting and began pawing gently at her dress pocket, the same pocket where she kept her most precious possessions. "What does he want?" she asked, reaching into the pocket. Her fingers found her mother's silver bracelet, the one she wore every day as a connection to Ila's memory. But as she pulled it from her pocket, Espiritu's behavior became even more insistent. He nosed at the bracelet, whining softly, then looked up at her with eyes that seemed to be trying to communicate something urgent. "He wants you to look at the bracelet more carefully," Grandfather observed. Keya held the delicate jewelry up to the lamplight, examining it with new attention. She had worn it for 3 years, treasured it as a simple memento of her mother's love. But now, studying it closely, she noticed details she had overlooked before. The intricate Apache symbols weren't just decorative, they were functional, hidden. Among the traditional protective markings were tiny scratches that formed numbers, a date and what looked like a combination. "It's not just a bracelet," she breathed. "It's a key. Your mother's authorization to access the bank box," Grandfather realized. She knew that if something happened to her, you would inherit her jewelry, and eventually you would need what she had hidden. The magnitude of Illa's planning was staggering. Even in death, she had continued to protect her family and the people she had fought to save. Every detail had been considered, every possibility anticipated. But as the full implications sank in, Keya realized they were facing an even more dangerous situation than they had imagined. If Espiritu's collar contained the key to evidence that could destroy Varga's operation, then the bounty hunters weren't just looking for a valuable dog. They were hunting the one piece of evidence that could bring their entire criminal enterprise crashing down. "They know," she said suddenly. "Somehow they know what he's carrying." How could they know? Because someone told them. Someone who was there the night Mama died. The thought hit both of them like a physical blow. If Keya was right, then someone in their own community, someone Illa had trusted, had betrayed her to Varga. "Who else knew about your mother's work?" Grandfather asked quietly. Keya's mind raced through the possibilities. Rosa, Father Miguel, Sister Margaret, other network members scattered across the territory. How many people had known about the evidence? How many had known about Espiritu's special training? "We can't trust anyone," she said. "We can trust each other, and we can trust him." Grandfather nodded toward Espiritu, who had been following their conversation with the focused attention of someone understanding every word. "But if there's a traitor, then we proceed carefully, sharing our plans with no one until we are safely in Santa Fe." As if summoned by their fears, the sound of approaching horses echoed across the night desert. But these riders weren't trying to conceal their presence. Their horses moved at a gallop, and voices carried on the wind, shouting in Spanish and English. "Hide the evidence," Grandfather commanded. But even as Keya tucked the documents back into Espiritu's collar, they all knew it was too late for concealment. The riders burst into their yard like a war party, torches blazing and weapons drawn. At their head rode Joaquin Varga himself, a man Keya recognized from her mother's detailed descriptions, though seeing him in person was more terrifying than any written account could convey. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 40 years old, with the kind of cold handsomeness that could fool people into trusting him before they realized the cruelty in his pale eyes. Scars marked his face and hands, evidence of a life lived through violence, but it was his voice that chilled Keya to the bone. "Good evening, Silverwind family," he called out in accented English. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Through their small window, Keya watched her grandfather step onto the porch with the dignity of a chief addressing his council. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, Ahiga showed no fear, only the calm readiness of someone who had always known this moment would come. "I have nothing of yours," Grandfather replied. "Oh, but you do. You see, that dog you've been hiding, he doesn't just know my secrets, he carries them." Varga dismounted and walked closer to the house, his movements predatory and confident. "Your daughter was very clever. I'll give her that. She thought she could gather evidence against me, present it to federal authorities, and destroy my business. What she didn't understand was that I have friends in those federal offices. Friends who told me exactly what she was planning." The revelation hit like a thunderbolt. The federal marshals that Father Miguel had contacted, some of them were corrupt, working with Varga instead of against him. "You killed her for trying to do right," Keya said, stepping onto the porch beside her grandfather before he could stop her. Varga's cold gaze shifted to her, and his smile was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. "I killed her for interfering with my property rights. Those slaves she helped escape represented thousands of dollars in lost revenue. Your mother was a thief, nothing more. She was a hero. Heroes die, little girl. Thieves die. Smart people live by knowing when to step aside and let business proceed." Inside the house, Espiritu began to growl, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. Through the door, Keya could see his silhouette, every muscle tensed for action despite his still-healing condition. "You can make this." "Easy," Varga continued, "or you can make this hard. Either way, I'm leaving here tonight with that dog and anything he might be carrying. And if we refuse, then you'll join your daughter in whatever afterlife Indians believe in." The threat was delivered with casual indifference, as if the murder of an elderly man and young girl was simply another business decision. But Varga had made one critical mistake. He had underestimated the bond between a girl and the dog who carried her mother's legacy. From inside the house came a sound that made every horse in Varga's party shy and dance nervously. Espiritu wasn't just growling anymore. He was singing, producing the haunting, otherworldly howl that had echoed across the desert on his first night home. But this wasn't a song of mourning. This was a war cry. "That dog," one of Varga's men said nervously. "Something's not right about that dog." "It's just an animal," Varga snapped, but Keya could see uncertainty flickering in his pale eyes. "Animals don't sing like that, Jefe, and look at the horses. They're terrified." Indeed, every horse in the yard was showing signs of extreme agitation, rolling their eyes and pulling against their reins as if trying to flee from some invisible threat. Espiritu's howl rose higher, joined by answering calls from across the desert. Coyotes, wolves, and other creatures of the night were responding to his song, creating a symphony of wild voices that seemed to surround Varga's men from all directions. "Just shoot the damn dog and be done with it," one of the gunfighters muttered. But as he raised his rifle, Espiritu appeared in the doorway, no longer the broken, tar-covered stray who had collapsed in their yard, but a creature transformed. His coat gleamed golden brown in the torchlight, his muscles coiled with barely contained power, his eyes reflecting an intelligence that seemed almost supernatural. And around his neck, clearly visible now, hung the leather tag bearing his name. And his mission, Guardian of Truth. "You want him?" Keya called out, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "Come and take him." The sacred eagle feather trembled in Ahiga's weathered hands as he lifted it toward the four directions, calling upon the spirits of their ancestors to witness the ceremony that would either bless their mission or serve as their funeral rite. Dawn was still 3 hours away, but preparation for what lay ahead could not wait for convenient timing. "Great Spirit, hear the prayer of your children," he intoned in the old language, his voice carrying across the desert silence with the authority of generations. "Guide the steps of this child and this faithful guardian as they walk the path of justice. Let them carry the wisdom of Ila Silverwind and the courage of all who have died for truth." Keya knelt beside him on the hard-packed earth of their small, ceremonial space, feeling the weight of tradition and expectation settling around her like an invisible cloak. In her hands, she held the eagle feather that had been passed down through 5 generations of their family, a symbol of spiritual strength that was only brought out in times of greatest trial. The events of the past week had transformed their quiet reservation life into something resembling a military campaign. After Varga's threatening visit, word had spread quickly through the Apache community, and the response had been both surprising and heartening. Far from abandoning the Silverwind family to their fate, neighbors had begun arriving with offers of help that defied both logic and safety. Old Joseph Windwalker had contributed ammunition and dried provisions. Maria Santos, whose husband had died in the same raid that killed Illa, brought medical supplies and her knowledge of desert survival. Even the children had helped, gathering information about Varga's movements and the locations of his scouts. "Your mother saved my nephew's family 2 years ago," Maria had explained as she packed medicine into a leather satchel small enough for travel. "They reached California safely because of her courage. Now it's time to repay that debt." But not everyone in the community supported their cause. The promise of reward money had created divisions that cut through lifelong friendships and family bonds. Mrs. Blackhorse had stopped speaking to families who openly supported the Silverwinds. Young men who needed work had begun asking pointed questions about the dog's whereabouts. $50 could feed a family through winter, Sister Margaret had warned during her last visit. Desperation makes people do things they never thought possible. Father Miguel had brought even more disturbing news from his contacts in town. Varga has recruited local men, Apache men, to serve as guides and informants. He's offering wages that most reservation families cannot refuse. The betrayal cut deep, but Grandfather had accepted it with the resignation of someone who had lived through too many compromises to be surprised by human weakness. Hunger is a powerful enemy, he had said. I cannot blame people for choosing their children's survival over abstract justice. Now, as the ceremony continued, Keya felt the full weight of what they were attempting. In less than 6 hours, she and Espiritu would begin a journey that would take them across 200 miles of hostile territory, carrying evidence that could topple a criminal empire or get them both killed. The plan was both simple and terrifyingly complex. Using her mother's maps and Espiritu's knowledge of the secret routes, they would travel only at night, avoiding all settlements and known patrol areas. Father Miguel would meet them at predetermined locations along the way, providing supplies and updated information about Varga's movements. The final destination was the territorial bank of Santa Fe, where Ila's safety deposit box waited with evidence that could finally bring her killers to justice. But reaching that destination would require navigating a gauntlet of dangers that had already claimed too many lives. The dog is strong enough for the journey? Grandfather asked, for the third time in 2 days. Keya looked at Espiritu, who sat beside them with perfect stillness, his attention focused on every word of the ceremony. The transformation in his appearance was remarkable. Clean coat gleaming in the firelight, scars healed, eyes bright with intelligence and purpose. More importantly, his spirit had returned. This was no longer a broken animal seeking refuge, but a warrior preparing for battle. He's ready, she said with certainty she hadn't known she possessed. And you, child? Are you ready to walk your mother's path? The question hung in the air between them, like smoke from their ceremonial fire. Keya thought about everything she had learned in the past week, about her mother's secret life, about the network of brave people who had risked everything for strangers' freedom, about the evidence that could stop men like Varga from destroying more families. I've been ready my whole life, she said. I just didn't know it yet. As the ceremony concluded, they were joined by an unexpected visitor. Rosa Morales appeared at the edge of their firelight, leading a pack mule loaded with supplies and moving with the careful silence of someone who had learned to travel undetected. I couldn't let you make this journey alone, she said simply. Ila was my friend, and this is my fight too. It's too dangerous, Grandfather protested. If you're caught helping us, then I'll die the same way she did, fighting for something that matters more than my own safety. Rosa's presence changed everything. With her knowledge of the Mexican side of the border routes and her connections among sympathetic ranchers and priests, their chances of success improved dramatically. More importantly, she brought additional weapons and the kind of practical experience that could mean the difference between success and disaster. Varga has patrols on all the main roads, she reported as they finalized their plans. But the old Apache trails through the high country are still clear. It will add days to the journey, but it's our best chance of reaching Santa Fe undetected. What about pursuit? He'll follow, no question. But Espiritu knows tricks that no Mexican tracker can match. Your mother trained him to use terrain that would break the legs of pursuit horses. As they spoke, the dog in question was demonstrating exactly the kind of intelligence Rosa described. Without any prompting, he had positioned himself at the edge of their camp, where he could monitor approaches from 3 different directions. His ears moved constantly, filtering night sounds for anything that didn't belong. He's been doing that all week, Keya observed, standing guard while we sleep, watching for dangers we can't see. Border dogs are trained to think like generals, Rosa explained. They understand strategy, timing, the importance of choosing when to hide and when to run, and when to fight, especially when to fight. The final hours before departure passed in a blur of last-minute preparations and emotional farewells. Grandfather would remain behind to maintain the illusion of normalcy, an old man grieving alone with no knowledge of any dog or secret mission. But Keya could see the pain in his eyes as he prepared to send his only remaining family member into danger. "If something happens to me," she said, as they shared what might be their last meal together, "remember that I chose this. Remember that Mama would be proud." "Nothing will happen to you," he replied firmly. "Espiritu will see to that." As if responding to his name, the dog moved to sit beside Keya, his warm presence a reminder that she wouldn't be facing the dangers ahead alone. In his eyes, she saw not just loyalty, but understanding. This animal comprehended the importance of their mission as clearly as any human participant. "Tell me about the routes," Keya said to Rosa as they studied the maps one final time. "What should I expect?" "The first night will be the most dangerous. We have to cross open ground where Varga's scouts are most likely to spot us. After that, we enter the mountain passages where pursuit becomes much more difficult. And if we're followed, then we trust Espiritu to choose the paths that favor escape over speed." As midnight approached, they made their final preparations. Keya, dressed in dark clothing that would blend with night shadows, secured her mother's bracelet where it couldn't be lost, and accepted the small pack of supplies that would sustain her for the days ahead. Most importantly, she spent precious minutes ensuring that all evidence was properly secured in Espiritu's collar, protected by layers of oiled leather that would resist both weather and detection. "The hardest part," Rosa warned as they prepared to leave, "will be staying silent when you want to call for help. Desert travel requires absolute discipline. No unnecessary sounds, no lights, no fires, unless we're certain of complete concealment." "I understand, do you? Because one moment of carelessness could get us all killed." The bluntness of Rosa's warning should have terrified Keya, but instead it brought clarity. This was no longer a child's adventure or a family crisis. This was war, fought in shadows and silence against enemies who had already proven their willingness to kill anyone who opposed them. "I'm ready," Keya said, and meant it. As they stepped into the star-filled darkness, Espiritu taking point with the confidence of someone returning to familiar duty, Keya felt her mother's presence like a warm wind at her back. Somewhere in the night ahead lay justice for Illa's murder and freedom for all the families still trapped in Varga's web of violence. But first, they had to survive a journey that would test every lesson her mother had tried to teach her about courage, sacrifice, and the price of doing what was right in a world that often rewarded only the ruthless. The eagle feather, now tucked safely in her pack, seemed to pulse with spiritual energy as they disappeared into the desert darkness, following paths known only to the dead and the dog who remembered every step of their beloved teacher's final mission. The medicine bundle felt heavy in Keya's hands as she clutched the sacred collection of healing herbs and spiritual items that Grandfather had pressed into her pack before they left. Dawn was breaking over the rocky outcropping where they had taken refuge for the night, and Espiritu's sudden alertness told her that their pursuers had finally caught up. 3 days of careful travel through mountain passes and hidden canyons had brought them within 40 miles of Santa Fe. They had moved like ghosts through landscape that would have challenged experienced trackers, following routes that existed only in Espiritu's memory and the fading marks left by her mother's careful planning. But Varga had proven more persistent and resourceful than they had hoped. "How many?" Rosa whispered, reading the tension in Espiritu's posture as the dog stared down the canyon they had climbed during the night. The dog held up one paw, then another, then a third, the hand signal Illa had taught him for communicating. "Numbers to human partners. 3 riders," Keya translated, marveling again at the sophistication of her mother's training methods. "Just a scouting party," Rosa said grimly. "The main force will be behind them. They had known this moment would come. Varga's men had been tracking them systematically, cutting off escape routes and driving them toward this confrontation like wolves herding deer toward a cliff. The only surprise was that they had made it this far before being cornered. "We could surrender," Rosa said without conviction. "Give them the dog and hope they let us live." Keya looked at Espiritu, who was watching her with eyes that held 3 years of faithful waiting and the accumulated wisdom of countless dangerous crossings. In that gaze, she saw her mother's determination, her grandfather's quiet strength, and something new, her own emerging understanding of what it meant to choose principle over safety. "Mama didn't surrender," she said quietly, "even when she knew they were coming for her. Your mother was a grown woman who understood the consequences of her choices. And I'm her daughter, which means I understand them too." The sound of approaching. Horses grew louder, echoing off the canyon walls in ways that made it impossible to determine exact numbers or positions. Varga's men were professionals. They knew how to use terrain to mask their movements and create confusion among their targets. "The evidence," Rosa said urgently. "We need to hide it where they can't find it, even if they take the dog." But Espiritu had other ideas. As the humans debated their options, the dog moved to a specific section of the rock wall and began the scratching behavior that indicated a hidden cache. Within minutes, he had revealed another of Illa's concealed supply points. This, one containing weapons that had been waiting 3 years for exactly this moment. She planned for this, Keya realized as she examined the rifles and ammunition. She knew someone would eventually have to make this journey under pursuit. "Your mother planned for everything," Rosa confirmed, checking the action on one of the sister weapons with practiced efficiency, including the possibility that her daughter might need to finish what she started. The first gunshot echoed through the canyon like thunder, followed immediately by Espiritu's warning bark. Their pursuers had abandoned stealth in favor of direct assault, confident that superior numbers and firepower would overwhelm 2 women and a dog trapped in hostile terrain. They were about to learn how wrong they could be. Keya took cover behind. A boulder, her mother's medicine bundle pressed against her chest, like armor made of faith and memory. Rosa positioned herself across the narrow canyon, creating crossfire lanes that would force attackers to expose themselves to reach either position. But it was Espiritu who truly understood the tactical situation. Instead of hiding like a frightened animal, he moved to a position where he could monitor the 3 approaches to their refuge. His training included more than guiding refugees. He knew how to coordinate defensive actions with human partners. "When I signal," Rosa called across the canyon, "you and the dog move to the next position. Stay low, move fast, and trust him to choose the safest path." The first of Varga's scouts appeared at the canyon mouth, rifle ready and eyes scanning for targets. He was a young man, probably Mexican or mixed blood, with the nervous energy of someone new to this kind of work. Espiritu saw him before the humans did, his subtle hand signal alerting them to the approaching threat. Then, without waiting for permission, the dog did something that took everyone by surprise. He howled, not the mournful song they had heard before, but a specific pattern of sounds that echoed off the canyon walls and seemed to multiply, creating the auditory illusion of multiple dogs positioned throughout the area. The scout's horse reared in terror, throwing its rider and bolting back down the trail. Within seconds, the canyon was filled with the sounds of confusion and shouted orders as Varga's men tried to regroup against an enemy they couldn't see or count. "Psychological warfare," Rosa said with admiration. "That dog is a tactical genius." But their celebration was short-lived. The sound of many horses approaching at speed announced that Varga himself was coming with his full force, determined to end this chase once and for all. "This is it," Rosa said, checking her ammunition one final time. "Everything your mother died for comes down to the next hour." Keya nodded, surprising herself with the steadiness of her own voice as she replied, Then let's make sure she didn't die for nothing. The bloodied bullet casing glinted in the morning sun as Espiritu dropped it at Keya's feet. Physical evidence from the night of Isla's murder, preserved for 3 years in a secret compartment of his collar that even Rosa hadn't known existed. The brass cartridge bore distinctive markings that would match the weapons carried by Varga's men, proof that could finally connect them to the crime that had shattered her family. "You kept this all this time," Keya whispered to the dog, who responded with a soft whine that seemed to carry the weight of 3 years' worth of patient justice. Around them, the canyon battle had reached its crescendo. Varga's dozen gunfighters had discovered that cornering an Apache guide dog and his human companions was far more difficult than tracking them across open desert. Every approach to their position was met with precisely aimed rifle fire from Rosa's concealed location and the psychological warfare of Espiritu's tactical howling. But it was the arrival of unexpected allies that turned the tide of combat. Father Miguel appeared on the canyon rim above them, leading a group of Mexican federal soldiers whose presence announced that someone in authority had finally decided to act on the evidence they carried. Behind them rode territorial marshals, the honest ones, Keya realized, not the corrupt officials who had been feeding information to Varga. "Joaquin Varga!" Father Miguel's voice boomed across the canyon with the authority of both church and state. "You are under arrest for murder, human trafficking, and conspiracy against the governments of both Mexico and the United States territory." The gunfire stopped as abruptly as it had begun. In the sudden silence, Keya could hear Varga shouting orders to his men, his voice tight with the kind of panic that comes when carefully laid plans collapse without warning. "You have no authority here, priest," Varga called back, but his words carried desperation rather than conviction. "I have the authority of God and country," Father Miguel replied, "and more importantly, I have the evidence your victim spent her life gathering." From her position behind the boulder, Keya watched as Espiritu made a decision that would have seemed impossible for an ordinary dog. Instead of staying safely hidden, he stood and walked into the open ground between the opposing forces, the bloodied bullet casing still held gently in his mouth. "Don't shoot the dog!" one of the federal soldiers called out. "He's carrying evidence we need!" Varga's response was swift and vicious. "Kill that animal before he reaches them." But as his men raised their rifles, something extraordinary happened. Espiritu didn't run or hide. Instead, he began to sing again, his haunting howl carrying across the canyon with a power that seemed to transcend the physical world. The song was answered. From every direction, the voices of desert predators joined his call, coyotes, wolves, and wildcats adding their voices to a chorus that filled the canyon with primal music. The horses of Varga's men went mad with terror, rearing and bolting, throwing their riders and destroying any semblance of tactical coordination. In that moment of chaos, Keya understood something profound about her mother's relationship with Espiritu. This wasn't just a working partnership, it was a spiritual bond that connected the dog to the very essence of the desert itself. "Now!" Rosa shouted, and Keya ran from her hiding place toward the federal soldiers, clutching the medicine bundle and trusting Espiritu to clear the path ahead. The dog reached the soldiers first, dropping the bullet casing at the feet of their commander before turning to escort Keya safely across the dangerous ground. His movements were graceful and confident, every step calculated to avoid the wild gunfire from Varga's panicked men. When Keya reached the safety of the federal position, she found herself face to face with Marshal William Torres, a man whose weathered features and kind eyes reminded her of her grandfather. "You must be Illa's daughter," he said gently. "Your mother was a remarkable woman. You knew her. She contacted me 6 months before she died, trying to arrange a meeting to present evidence against Varga's operation. We were supposed to meet in Santa Fe, but she was murdered before she could make the journey. Yes, and I've regretted that delay every day since." Marshal Torres examined the bullet casing that Espiritu had preserved, his expression growing darker as he studied. The distinctive markings. This matches the ammunition we found at the raid site, he confirmed. Combined with the other evidence your mother gathered, we finally have enough to shut down Varga's entire organization. Below them in the canyon, the last of the gunfight was ending as Varga's remaining men threw down their weapons in surrender. The man himself was nowhere to be seen. He had escaped during the confusion, but his criminal empire was crumbling around him. It's over, Rosa said, embracing Keya as federal soldiers secured the area. No, Keya replied, watching Espiritu stand guard over the captured evidence with the dignity of someone who had finally completed a mission 3 years in the making. It's just beginning. The dog looked up at her with eyes that reflected not just intelligence but peace, the deep satisfaction of a promise kept and justice finally served. The new collar tag gleamed in the afternoon sunlight as Keya fastened it around Espiritu's neck, hand-carved wood reading Espiritu, Guardian of the Espiritu Family, in both Apache and Spanish script. 3 months had passed since their journey to Santa Fe, and the transformation in both their lives was as complete as the desert's seasonal change from autumn drought to winter abundance. Willow Creek had settled into a new rhythm, one shaped by justice served and secrets finally brought to light. The federal trials had concluded with convictions that sent shockwaves through criminal networks on both sides of the border. Varga himself had been captured 2 weeks after the canyon confrontation, found hiding in a cave system that Espiritu's knowledge of desert terrain had helped authorities locate. 47 years in territorial prison, Grandfather announced as he returned from town with news of the final sentencing, and full restitution to the families of his victims. Keya looked up from where she sat, teaching Espiritu a new command, not for border crossing or tactical operations, but for the peaceful work of helping her tend their expanded garden. The dog had adapted to domestic life with the same intelligence he had brought to more dangerous duties, but his eyes still held depths of experience that spoke to adventures most creatures never imagined. And the others, the corrupt officials, who helped him, removed from office and facing their own trials. The territorial governor has promised complete investigation of anyone connected to the trafficking network. The official justice was satisfying, but it was the personal healing that meant more to Keya. Living with the truth about her mother's heroic work had replaced the hollow ache of unanswered questions with something more complex, but ultimately more peaceful. Pride mixed with grief, understanding tempered by loss, but no longer the bitter confusion that had haunted her for 3 years. Sister Margaret had returned to her teaching duties at the mission school, but now her lessons included stories about the Underground Railroad and the brave people who had risked everything for others' freedom. History, she told her students, is made by ordinary people who choose to do extraordinary things. Rosa had decided to stay in the area, establishing a legitimate crossing assistance program that helped families immigrate through proper legal channels. Her new operation worked closely with territorial authorities, providing the same routes and safety measures that had once been necessary for secret escapes. The world is changing, she told Keya during one of her regular visits. What your mother did in secret, we can now do in daylight. Father Miguel had been reassigned to a larger parish in Santa Fe, where his experience with border communities had made him valuable to church officials trying to understand the complex needs of their diverse congregations. But he still returned to Willow Creek monthly, drawn by bonds forged in shared danger and mutual respect. Your mother would be proud, he said during his latest visit, watching Keya work with Espiritu to practice the healing ceremonies grandfather had begun teaching her. Not just of what you accomplished, but of who you've become. The dog himself had become something of a legend throughout the territory. Stories spread about the guide dog who had crossed impossible distances to bring justice for his murdered partner, growing in the telling until Espiritu was credited with supernatural powers and near-human intelligence. The truth Keya knew, was both simpler and more remarkable. Espiritu was extraordinary not because of magic, but because of love, the kind of bone-deep loyalty that could survive 3 years of wandering, abuse and despair without losing faith in the possibility of home. "He's teaching the new puppies," Grandfather observed as they watched Espiritu interact with a litter born to one of the reservation's working dogs. The patient way he corrected their behavior and guided their exploration spoke to instincts that went far beyond simple pack dynamics. "Maybe someday they'll help people too," Keya said. "Not the dangerous kind of help Mama had to do, but good work that keeps families together, perhaps. But first, they must learn to be dogs, not warriors." The wisdom in her grandfather's words reflected changes in their own lives. The heroic journey was complete, the evidence delivered, the killers brought to justice. Now came the harder but more important work of building a life worthy of the sacrifice that had made it possible. Keya had returned to school, but her education now included lessons that no classroom could provide. Grandfather was teaching her the traditional healing arts, how to read the desert's moods, how to gather and prepare medicines from native plants, how to provide comfort to people carrying burdens too heavy for one soul to bear alone. "Healing," he told her, "is what we do after the fighting ends." Most evenings found them sitting together on their small porch, watching the desert transform under shifting light while Espiritu kept his gentle vigil beside them. The dog no longer watched for enemies. His alertness now focused on simpler threats like approaching storms or the occasional rattlesnake that wandered too close to their home. "Do you miss it?" Keya asked Espiritu one evening as they sat watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "The adventure, the danger, the important work?" The dog tilted his head as if considering her question, then moved closer to rest his muzzle on her lap. His answer came not in words, but in the simple contentment of his presence, a creature who had found peace after years of carrying burdens too heavy for any single heart. "I think he's tired of being a hero," Grandfather observed with gentle humor. "Sometimes the greatest courage is in choosing an ordinary life after extraordinary service." As autumn deepened into winter, their home became a gathering place for people whose lives had been touched by Illa's network. Former refugees made pilgrimages to thank the family of the woman who had saved them. Network survivors came to share stories and heal from traumas they had carried in silence for too long. Each visitor left with a sense of closure that had been missing from their lives, and each departure reminded Keya that her mother's influence extended far beyond the borders of their small reservation. "She lives on in all of us," Rosa said during her final visit before relocating to Santa Fe. "Every life she saved, every family she kept together, every child who grew up free because of her courage, that's Illa's true monument." The carved wooden cross that had led them to her mother's hidden evidence now rested on a small shelf inside their home, surrounded by other mementos of Illa's work. Letters from grateful families, pressed flowers from the desert roots, and photographs of children who had grown up safe because one Apache woman had refused to let injustice go unchallenged. On the anniversary of their journey to Santa Fe, Keya and Espiritu walked the familiar path to the trading post. Not because they needed supplies, but because the routine connected them to memories that had lost their sting without losing their meaning. James Patterson greeted them with the warmth reserved for family, his respect for their ordeal evident in every gesture. "How's our famous dog today?" he asked, offering Espiritu a treat from the jar he now kept specifically for their visits. "He's just Espiritu," Keya replied with a smile. "That's enough." Walking home in the late afternoon light, with Espiritu ranging ahead to investigate interesting scents and Grandfather waiting on their porch with the endless patience of someone who had learned that the best moments were the quiet ones, Keya felt the deep satisfaction of a circle completed. Her mother's work lived on in the legal programs that Rosa had established. in the federal investigations that continued to root out corruption, in the stories that would be told for generations about the Apache woman who had chosen strangers' children over her own safety. But more than that, Illa's love lived on in the bond between a girl and the dog who had crossed impossible distances to keep a promise made in blood and devotion. Every morning brought new adventures, not the dangerous kind that had defined their past, but the gentle explorations of two souls who had learned that home was not a place but a choice to protect what mattered most. As the sun set over the desert that had tested them and ultimately blessed them, Keya scratched behind Espiritu's ears and whispered the words her mother had taught her for blessing faithful companions. Ahehe shike, thank you, my friend. The dog's tail wagged in perfect contentment, and in that simple gesture, Keya heard the echo of her mother's laughter and felt the warmth of love that neither death nor distance could diminish. Some stories end with victory over evil. Others end with the quiet triumph of choosing love over fear, hope over despair, action over acceptance of injustice. This story ended with a little girl and her mother's dog walking home together through desert light, carrying in their hearts the knowledge that even the smallest acts of courage can change the world. One rescued soul, one kept promise, one moment of refusing to let darkness win. Behind them, their footprints joined the countless tracks of all who had walked these paths before, and ahead of them, the lights of home welcomed them back to the ordinary miracle of another day lived in freedom.